Thank you, and thank you for joining today. Our webcast is called Data Governance with Azure Purview. Briefly, my name is Ben Dunmeyer. I'm a business intelligence and analytics consultant at Thorogood, and I'm speaking to you today from Philadelphia. I have deep experience in the Microsoft Azure stack, and we'll be pulling on that knowledge for the discussion today. Really, what we're going to be focusing on, just a few sections today. I'll start to say just a little bit about Thorogood, and then I'll jump into the main content just to introduce Purview, talk about its features, and some editorial around it. I think a bulk of the time will be around a demo and just really walking through all the different features, some of the different strategies we have to implement some data governance techniques using Azure Purview, and just some thoughts on how it will work. And then I'll end, not necessarily specific to Purview, but just thinking about and talking about enabling data governance, which is obviously a big topic and one that can provide some thoughts around. Here, for those of you who don't know Thorogood, we're an independent global professional services firm specializing in business intelligence and analytics with a focus on our customers. We're a global organization with offices in Philadelphia, Boston, London, Bangalore, Singapore, and Sao Paulo, Brazil. All our consultants are recruited and trained in the same way to develop a unique mix of skills, blending business understanding in the form of industry and functional experience with strong technical aptitude and a deep understanding of analytical tools and techniques. We do offer a full range of data and analytics services, including strategy and roadmaps, design, implementation, data analysis, and training and support. In terms of the technologies we work with, we are an independent consulting firm, meaning we don't work with one specific technology. We do, however, work and partner with many of the key players in the market in order to provide our clients with a solution that best suits their needs. We have a long-standing partnership with Microsoft, maintaining a number of gold competencies, which you can see, running training programs and having the opportunity to work closely with the Microsoft teams. Obviously, today's session zeroes in on Microsoft, but the topic of data governance, as I mentioned, prevails across really any technology or data assets that we use in our organizations. And increasingly with multi-cloud approaches, it's becoming more important to think holistically and practically about data governance. So I'll jump into Purview. So what is it? And really simply, it's Microsoft's offering for a data governance service. So a tool specifically designed to have features that allow us to apply data governance techniques and kind of operations and options across our data sets. Interesting, and you can see from images, is Purview is really meant to look beyond just Microsoft data sources, as beyond just Azure, beyond just Microsoft, but across cloud platforms, across cloud and on-premises. Some of the key kind of components or features is automated discovery, the identification and classification of sensitive data elements, which we'll show in a bit, and then end-to-end lineage, which are, I think, some of the core components of a data governance tool. And I think the idea is really adding Azure Purview to the stack of options or tools in the Microsoft portfolio is really filling a gap that has previously been filled by third-party products or custom solutions. So we'll talk about it today, and we'll also see how it's evolving. It just became generally available a month or two ago. And then more kind of broadly, data governance probably has lots of different definitions and perspectives, and different organizations have lots of different focuses and maturities with it. But really the way I think about it is kind of doing it all with data. So how do we maintain data? How do we evolve it? How do we grow it over time? How do we make it readily available and available to the right people in the right format? And I think we can kind of safely say it's a core element of any kind of well-functioning data environment and data platform. The sticky thing is that it's really tricky to do right and get right to start, and then even trickier maybe to maintain it over time, to maintain the same level of buy-in, of involvement and practices that stick to your vision for data governance. So a few of the features of Purview. So discovery, I mentioned, so the ability to automatically crawl or comb through data sources and discover elements. And I'll show a couple of examples of this. So it's pretty key to identify schemas down to the column, be able to look at lineage and then data classification. Something that we're often looking to do, particularly from maybe a bit core enterprise sources, is that mapping of source to destination. So how did this piece of data that I'm looking at in a report, where did it come from? How many layers did it pass through? And that's a complicated thing often is in enterprise solutions. So We're seeing functionality to do that. How do you apply it is a question. There's also the mapping between data elements that are related to one another. So we often have the same name or representation of different elements. So we might call it accounts in many different terms. The ability to track. So from an infrastructure perspective, often think about drift, but how are we seeing how our data sources are evolving over time? Adding elements, removing elements, where does data exist? And maybe one of the first things I think of when someone says data governance is cataloging. So definition of data elements, but also the cataloging or collection of all our different data assets in one central place. So all these are features of Azure Purview and what you might expect out of a data tool. Something that's interesting coming from, and I've seen this kind of study in reference to a number of places, but the statistic that organizations will not use 73% of their data for analytics, so 73% will. And you can think that data governance might be one way in which we can kind of help address that or kind of get value out of the right data. And what Microsoft is positioning is saying Purview is going to help. We've got data storage, we have data processing, we have lots of options, and here's a tool that we think can help with identifying, discovering, making data interpretable. And the question for all of us is, how do we implement it effectively? How do we build it or apply it really in a way that works for our organization, fulfills our needs, and provides value? So some of the things I think about doing is helping kind of development activities. So the ability to know the right data, where it's at, and be able to grab it when you need it. So helping with development activities, particularly with the proliferation of data lakes, having that central organization or kind of catalog of all the data sets that exist, and particularly when a lot of organizations are in maybe a hybrid phase where some things are in the cloud, some things are on premises. It's a lot of data in lots of different places. Usability of data, so we don't want to reinvent the wheel all the time. So knowing where data exists and grabbing it. Something interesting, I think this is the next step is pushing the envelope on advanced analytics. So if we have a very good sense of what data exists, can make it easily accessible and understandable, we're able to empower those with the skills or appetite to kind of then apply advanced analytics on that data. And I think kind of the penultimate goal of data governance and what we're really striving for is proving the value that data governance, not necessarily a technology, beyond that, the value that a data governance strategy really provides to the organization. And I think data governance goes well beyond technology. I don't really think it's a technology problem. I think technology is definitely an enabler to it, like most things, but it's really about strategizing and organizing around it. Let's take a look at Purview, and I'll jump around through a number of different features. So when we go to Purview, it kind of looks similar if we're using the Azure portal to any other tool. So you can see a few options here, the Studio and then managing users. So I already have it open, but the Azure Purview Studio is a specific user interface for the Purview tool. And this is where it's kind of housed, all its features are housed kind of software as a service. So data catalog is kind of I'd say the main area and kind of the landing page. I'll show you, come back to this last. I'll look at data map first. And this is really where I'd say a lot of the kind of configuration is happening. And you can see here the first kind of pane is all our different data sources. So this is where we're specifying which data sources we want to be recognized in Purview by the kind of cataloging and all the other features. I mentioned here some of the interoperability and kind of that holistic data kind of landscape view. It's not just Microsoft data sources. So you can see that here, and I'll scroll through. AWS sticks out. There are a number of open source tools and a few things that you see still in preview. And again, it would only naturally this list will only grow. It only could become more sophisticated. I think jumping into any of these data sources, there might be some limitations now. There might be some certain design patterns that need to be followed. But we'd only expect this list to continue growing and becoming kind of more holistic in the same way that tools like Data Factory and Synapse have so many different data connectors. You can see here I've just grabbed a few data sources, so Data Lake, a few databases, and Power BI, which actually looks at Power BI data sets. I think the Data Lake is maybe most interesting, so I'll look at that first. And you can see here, this is really just a bit of configuration as to which data lake it is. So you can see that here, it's just a mock data lake. And then a bit of information around kind of where it exists in our landscape. So certainly within enterprises, we're going to have data in different subscriptions, different regions, things like that. So a place to organize it. And really the key thing that happens here is scans. And a scan is effectively kind of crawling or combing through a data source, looking at all the elements within that data source and then bubbling them up to the data catalog. So you can imagine a data lake has data in lots of different file formats. So really kind of the inbuilt ability to comb through those, interpret those, look at the columns, look at other features of that data and pull it up. So we'll just pretend we're creating a new scan here. It's nothing too interesting here. We can just see that, as you would expect, Purview needs some sort of identity to access things. So it creates a managed service identity, which is really Azure's direction, which then needs to be given access on the data source. So that's good. It'll hopefully check this for us. And here one of the things I was debating is, do you have the ability to kind of segment things how you want? And I think to an extent you do. So for example, I might not be interested in scanning all of the data in my data lake. Particularly, I might not need to do it with a raw or operational layer, for example. And the same with databases. We would have, ETL schemas or metadata schemas that don't necessarily belong in a catalog. So there's some ability to do it. I think this will also grow over time and become a little bit. Right now, this is kind of scoped to an entire data lake unit. We might want kind of more segmentation in the future. But here you can exclude containers, and within a container you can exclude or include folders. So pretty interesting. So maybe I'll just do that. And here, and I'll show if you imagine what's happening here, we have a data lake with CSV files and Parquet files and Navro and an endless list of different types of files. And out of the box, Microsoft has built a kind of default rule set, which kind of enables the Purview tool to be able to go in and interpret lots of different file types. So the ability to look at a CSV file or a Parquet file and interpret its schema. So there's of course the out of the box option, which is I'd say kind of quite a lot of features and pretty sufficient. And I'll talk about kind of customization later, but we'll just go with that. And the last thing here, and I'll stop, but we can set up a trigger. So when do we want this to run? And something like a data lake, you probably don't expect data to be changing all that much in terms of new structures. So maybe it's once a month or once a week or whatever it is. But depending on the data source, we can kind of tailor scans for different schedules. So you can see, let's cancel this. You can see I've already run a few scans and have a few different ones set up here. We can do that across our different data sources. I was mentioning the kind of scan rule set. So if we pick the Generation 2 data lake, you can see the out-of-the-box kind of standard system rule set can interpret a lot of different file types and file formats. And then I'll mention this in a second, but the different types of kind of elements within that it can kind of classify, which I'll talk about. Of course, you have some kind of unique data or unique structures that aren't picked up by this default rule set. You'd have to create something custom, which of course is an option here and something that needs to be built. And same sort of thing for kind of patterns, if there are certain patterns that you're looking for in data. I think something it's potentially a big game changer and a real, not necessarily gap, but both an opportunity and a huge risk with all the different data sensitivity regulations and legislation, and also the kind of the impetus to have very good data security. Similar to those rule sets, there's inbuilt, I would say, identifiers, which I imagine under the hood are regular expressions that Microsoft has kind of provided or created and maintains that identify a number of very common, I would say, personal data elements or elements that could together make a personal data identifier. So again, this is something that it'll take this pattern or this identity, and then it will as it's combing through and looking at data, it should identify instances where it thinks this element exists. So if we have here an Australia driver's license number, it should pick that up, which I think is incredibly fascinating. And again, the concept of it of applying a regular expression kind of pattern match is not all that novel, but doing it at scale is pretty powerful. And you can of course add custom things if there are things in your industry or data that you work with that's particularly unique. And then we can kind of turn those rules on and off here, so enable them or disable them, so things that might be relevant or not that relevant. And of course, I wouldn't say this is always going to be 100% correct. of course, but it's a pretty compelling and interesting thing, and I think fulfills some of the needs that a lot of organizations have to when they're managing maybe billions of data elements, columns of data, to be able to identify it or have some sort of mechanism to automatically kind of give some hints or give some direction is pretty powerful. So this data map is really a bit of the configuration. What do we want to happen? What's unique about our data that we want this kind of data cataloging tool to look at. I won't spend much time on insights here. You can see it's still in preview, but I think this is really some, let's say, automated intelligence or automated reporting on top of the information that Purview collects. So the question here is this sufficient to kind of get an understanding of what's happening, where there are potential risks, what's the health of, what's our coverage, or do you need some sort of kind of custom reporting on top of the output of Purview? And I would only expect it in the same way that like Power BI, natural language processing and Q&A features really evolved in an investment for Microsoft. We might see the same thing here, but I think an area that there's a bit of information to start here. I haven't found it necessarily kind of how to utilize it. It's kind of just some top level statistics, which is helpful. But how do we potentially start creating alerts on, for example, new personal data elements that get picked up? And then just some administrative aspects here is management of Purview. So this is some of the kind of foundational, like how it works. Some of the things that are interesting is lineage connections. And I think an area that has long been a very hard one to crack, and particularly because the creation of source to destination kind of pipelines with whatever tool it is often very complicated and tricky to do one-for-one lineage. There's a data factory connector, and I think it's certainly definitely a phase one type of thing where it's able to look at like a copy activity and pick up a source and destination. And I think this will be nice in some instances, but in the most part for enterprise implementations, we have things a bit more complicated than just a straight one-for-one copy, whether it's nested copy activities or notebooks to do transformations. But it's a very neat feature and one that we have to, I think, like keep an eye on for, and might be useful in kind of cases where there's some simple copying of data between areas, such as source to raw layer of a data lake, as an example. And then data shares, which becoming a bit more popular with external sharing. And the other thing I'll show here is I have Synapse Studio open. So just really briefly here, we can also make a connection from Synapse to an Azure Purview account, and I think that's just one account. So this is, again, Microsoft thinking holistically about its data storage, its data processing, all its different tools and how do they connect together. And again, not excluding our other data investments in other cloud platforms or on-premise tools. So again, there's some interesting integrations to keep an eye out for and see how they might become valuable. And the last bit I'll look at here is the catalog, and really maybe the most interesting, most valuable part of kind of where all this crawling and whatnot comes to fruition. Some things that we can do, and I've just created a couple elements here in the glossary, so none of these are pre-built or anything like that. I've entered these all kind of manually over time, but this is where we can put in different identifiers. So taking the case of a consumer goods company, we might have UPC, we can have a definition, we can have other names for it, what it's related to, so maybe it's related to item. So we can do that kind of column definition, I would say, so that tying a column that exists in some data set to this central identifier. And again, can be a lot of work to do. We have to identify all those different elements and then link them, which maybe over time can be kind of done automated, ability to kind of import and things like that. The other opportunity I see is to maybe use it more as a tag on data. So something that we often do in cataloging is kind of tagging data. And really, at the moment, this is maybe one of the best ways to tag a specific element, maybe whether that's a column or a whole data set in some sort of tool. So I'll show that in a bit here, but that was my thinking with Asia Pac and EMEA and different markets. So we'll just I won't search yet, I'll just look at the catalog. You can see our different data assets. We could look at all of them. So just look at all of them. And we can see it effectively has crawled through tables in a database, files in a data lake to effectively provide us some information around those elements. So I'll take the first one here, some mock point of sale table. We don't have any description or classification, so presumably no sensitive data in it, which makes sense We can see some basic properties on the data set. So, it's a table and a few other things. And then maybe most interestingly, we can see the schema and even the data types. And over time, if you have different labels or classifications, they'll get added here. And you can see I've connected a glossary term. So item here, I could probably also add UPC to it as well. So we could add another glossary term to specific columns. And you can see other information here like contact details and things like that. So you can set, does this really exist at a table level? Maybe, but you can maybe do it by schema or things like that. So the other thing I'll show is, and you can see here some of the different private or personal data assets that might have been picked up. You can see those being captured here, so we could kind of identify them in different data sets. We can also look at some of the kind of filtering I was talking about, or ability to tag data. So you can see I think I've tagged this as a US market. If I potentially go back and see if I have anything Asia Pac related, so maybe I'll just pick this, some random file in our data lake. I might choose to tag this with qualifiers as I wanted. I can tag it with a glossary term. So this isn't necessarily a specific column in this file, whatever type of file this is. But then if I go back to our catalog, we can start to use those labels, and it doesn't show up here because my list is too short, but we can start to use those labels to filter down and identify data. So there's a lot of different opportunities there. I don't think there's one right or wrong way to go about it. So I'll jump back here to our presentation and just kind of close up here. So hopefully that demo helped kind of jump around to a number of different features, what Purview can do, and really some of the opportunities and some of the growth that we expect in new data sources and new functionality. I'll close up here with just some thoughts around not just Purview, but how do we kind of implement some data governance practices. I think a big proponent, and I mentioned this earlier, is the roles and responsibilities. So it's not just a technology problem, but also kind of a people and organizational kind of opportunity. In terms of administration, what are your different angles? Your technology angle and your business angle. You might need to think about from a technology side, what's our security standard? How do we connect to these different data sources? Which data sources fit within Purview or whatever our data governance tool and which don't? And then from the business angle, it's maybe more around who are our owners of data sets? What's our organization to say, this group owns this set of data or these data elements, and how do you kind of maintain that over time? We can't lose the momentum of having gaps and nobody kind of having stewardship or awareness of data. The definition of standards. So from a technology perspective, we're often thinking about naming standards and conventions, and also development standards and how we build and architect systems. And then from a business side, what are our classifications of data? What data elements do we consider kind of most relevant to us in terms of personal data identification? And then probably a joint question is, how do we organize data? I'm sure lots of organizations have already worked through this, but is it by region? Is it by business unit? Is it a combination of both? Do we have some sort of gold, silver, bronze classification of different data maturity? So what are those standards, and how do they then get proliferated into a data governance tool? Stewardship, so I'll come back to this, is not just setting it up initially and selecting a tool, and how do you keep that moving as you try to maintain momentum or grow its usage? So from a technology perspective, it's good documentation, defining requirements for all development activities in terms of updating or having certain features that work well with the data governance tool or meet data governance standards. And then from a business angle, what are your definitions that you want in a glossary? What are the business definitions that explain this column of data or these couple of rows of data? And also what I mentioned is quality. So a data governance solution kind of falls flat if it's not done well, if the information is not correct or clear. So are you removing information that's unwarranted or incorrect? Are there certain gates that have to be met in order for something to go to production or to be added? So that's very common practice. And then on the business side, also certain things to think about. What's the kind of role of different groups, and how are you ensuring that you have the right people to know about it? A few factors here that I think kind of can lead to successful implementations, also some challenges to be on the lookout. So we often lax a bit maybe on documentation, or it kind of falls to the wayside as an afterthought, but be a stickler for it. Make sure that documentation is well done. It's a little bit hard to evolve it over time and keep it updated, but the best you can do is really valuable. I think really key for governance is getting joint buy-in. It's not a technology problem. It's not a business problem. It's kind of an everything. Problem is not the right word, but it needs that buy-in. It needs that kind of exploration and definition of value, and then the commitment to providing that value. And thinking about things like different standards and gates. And I think that one of the tricky parts is those gates or standards to be kind of reasonable, pragmatic, but to be enforced. So it's a fine balance of being kind of overbearing with being ineffective. Challenges, I think, going too quick to start. So you might identify your key data sources, maybe your consumption layer of your data lake, for example, and start there. I think, unfortunately, a data governance solution won't fix kind of underlying fundamental problems in master data or fundamental data quality issues in systems. So you don't expect data governance to fix issues with referential integrity. They might expose them or help you to lead to how to solve them, but you'll be innocent of that. I really think, and I'll come back to this a couple of times, it's not just ownership at the start, but continued ownership and realization of business value. It's often hard to put a price tag or a true definition on the value of data governance, which is a bit hard because how do you get buy-in and investment in it? But I think that's really key. A few things just to be thinking about and start getting started. It could be getting started. It could be seeing where you are right now and evolving. Get those key layers of whatever data storage, data warehouse, marts, or data lake. I think start with those areas that you expect people to be using for self-serve or kind of creation of products. Think about partnering with different business and product teams. So you have a use case or an example of the value data governance can provide. Thinking about the tools, people, organizational buy-in. So I've said this a couple of times. It's not just a tech problem. It's we've got to have all the pieces playing together. Considering what your end users need. So is a UI like Purview what they're looking for? Is it that and documentation? So what are people looking for? Is it maybe interactive reports? Lineage is I think a tricky one to implement, but maybe think about how it fits for something like SAP, which is generally a one-for-one copy from an SAP installation into some sort of data store. So try it out there. How does it work? And I think a big one is assigning ownership and then holding teams or individuals accountable. So how do you not just define who's the right person or people to own something, but how do you keep them accountable? How do they kind of be good stewards? So I hope some of that helps. I hope you're talking about Purview, some of its features, some of the editorial helps, and kind of how we're thinking about it. Again, a multifaceted problem and an opportunity to get to do and get data governance right. Some areas that Thorogood does work, and I mentioned some at the beginning when you can see a few examples out here. So certainly with governance strategies, implementations, but beyond that, doing implementations for advanced analytics, data engineering, data visualization across the board, and then things that are more strategic in terms of architecture definition, as well as different MLOps and DevOps endeavors. So thank you very much for coming along today and listening in, and feel free to get in touch with me if you have any thoughts, any questions, any feedback for the event. Thank you very much.